Welcome e-teachers to this section of our training course, Google Forms. In this section, we're going to learn how we can create a survey or a questionnaire in Google Forms. Our next section of the course will be called Google Quizzes, which is actually the same Google app as Google Forms, but Forms and Quizzes allow quite different functions for teachers, both of which are very useful. So we want to do a deep dive and present the features of both of them in this course one by one. Simply speaking, the difference between Forms and Quizzes is that Forms allows you to create a survey or a questionnaire to collect feedback from your students and to organize it very neatly. Quizzes allows more assessment features for creating assessed homework assignments, quizzes, or tests, and also includes marking and scoring features. So let's get started with how to create a survey in Google Forms. We'll first go to google.com/forms/about. On this page, you can click on the Go to Forms button. Here, enter your Gmail account and password. You'll be brought here to the dashboard of your Google Forms account. FYI, there are other ways to access creating a Google form, such as from Google Drive. If you're using that service, we'll look at that in a moment. But for now, let's stick with the Google Forms platform and dashboard. You can see that I have already created a few forms, and you'll see yours too if you've created any Google Forms. If you don't have any, no worries, that's why we're here. Okay, the first step is to click on this rainbow-colored plus icon, and you'll immediately be offered the generic starting template for a Google form. Okay, but before we get into modifying the form and adding questions, etc., let me show you that other way I mentioned, which may be more convenient or accessible to you if you're using Google Drive. So the other way to start is from Google Drive. So let's go to drive.google.com. Here in the familiar Drive dashboard, you will again see this new button that we saw earlier with this colorful plus. Simply click on it, and then you'll have this pop-up window. Locate Google Forms in this drop-down menu under Google Slides. So you see, now we've created another new form, and we're right back where we were if you start from Google Forms. So the first thing we're going to do is to give our form a name. Name it whatever you like. In this demonstration, I'm going to create a survey called Pre-Reading Worksheet to help check the prior knowledge of my students. So I'll name it that now. Okay, this is the name of my form. It provides some information to your students, but notice that the name of your form and the name of your file can actually be the same or different according to how you like to organize your teaching materials. So in order to name the file of your Google form, go to the top left here. You will see Untitled Form. And when you click that, Google automatically syncs the name of your title that we just did, Pre-Reading Worksheet. So that's handy. If you want to add something to your file name or change it altogether, you can do it in this window here. You may want to add, for example, the class or the date or other information to the file. Okay, also very convenient and comforting is, as you might have seen, this notice that all changes are saved in Drive. That means whatever you do and whatever changes you make to your Google form are automatically saved to your Drive cloud account, so you don't need to worry about losing your files if you work from this cloud space provided by your Google account. Next, I'm going to click on Form Description and leave some text instructions for my students. This is a pre-reading survey, and I'm interested in getting students' sincere views and opinions. Not yet conducting any assessment. It's kind of schema building. So I will not yet associate the students' answers with their names, but of course we'll see how to do that later on. You'll also notice that under the description, you have all these familiar formatting options. So you can choose them to create the effect you like. For example, I want to draw my students' attention to the word honestly. So I can select it and then make it bold, or I could make it italics, or I could underline it. I can even insert a link to create a hyperlink to a word. I can see that might be useful for many assignments in which you want to connect some instructions to a text. I can number the whole sentence if I have a few points to make in the description, or I can choose to add bullet points instead of numbers. If I don't want any of these format features, I can click the last icon here to remove all of the formatting. All these formatting features haven't always been available in Google Forms, so I think it's a nice added value feature. But as I have only 2 sentences in my sample, I won't go for any of that formatting here. Okay, so that's how we create a title and a description. Now let's get to it and create some questions. I want to start by showing you something that will be more useful to you later, or if you're a more experienced Google Forms user already. Remember that on the dashboard, I already had 3 forms created. As a teacher, you may often want to recycle content, either to create similar forms for catering to learner diversity or for different classes, or for similar lessons but in later years of teaching. So if you have a collection of forms which you created before, and you want to start by importing some questions from an old form into a new one, that will save you quite a bit of time and energy. And Google makes that easy. Okay, I often tell teachers that effective integration of IT tools may take a little more initial investment of time when you're getting familiar with new apps or creating the new content initially. But it can also save you a lot of time later on. So this is really like a good investment. So suppose you want to import some questions from a previous form. You can click this icon showing an arrow entering a sheet of paper to start to import your questions. I have 4 forms now, and I can click one of them to import those questions. On the right now, you will see a list of all the questions in the form that you're importing from. You can choose either select all. I actually only have 2 questions in that form. Or you can select or deselect to leave only the questions you need for your new form. This last question says, "How do you like your steak?" which doesn't sound very relevant to my new form. So I'm going to deselect it and then import just one question here. Once you've imported your questions, you'll see the type of question. In this case, I've imported a drop-down question, which means that students can select from a number of choices. And I have the option to add new options. If I don't want that, I can click this X remove button to remove it, or I can click and drag on this icon in front of the question number to move the options around and reorder them up or down. So that's very useful for you to organize your new form using the imported questions. So pro tip here is, if a lot of your new form will be like an old one, you can also just copy the old form and give it a new name and edit from there. So this import questions feature is especially helpful if you're going to have some significant differences but similar questions in your new form. Now I'm going to create our first new question. Notice that Google Forms has already given me a default question here, so I can start to create another question from this template. I'll just type the question into the box here. Of course, for every question that you ask your students, you'll want to think about what type of question will give you the most useful information you're looking for and will prompt the students to think about what you want them to think about. So many of us default very easily to using multiple choice question or perhaps short answer type questions, both of which are very useful and powerful, which is why we use them. But Google Forms allows us to explore many other options which extend the range of evaluation that we're capable of. And with Google Forms, we can access very easily. Okay, I think for this kind of feeling or affect type question, we can learn more from students if it's a linear or Likert scale question. So to change the question type, I'll click on the question type pop-up menu and change this multiple choice question to linear scale question. Now students will be required to answer this question on a scale of 1 to 5. You can also change the number of increments in the scale. For example, I can change it 1 to 7. But I think the default scale of 5 is a good standard for this question. Next here, I can give a label to the extremes 1 and 5 of the scale. I'll label 1 as not at all. For the other extreme, I'm going to label 5 as very much. Okay, so that's how the linear scale question works. Notice that each time you create a question, you can choose to toggle this required button on, which means that students must complete that question. It will be marked with a red asterisk when they take the survey, and they cannot submit the form unless they answer all the required questions. Okay, later we'll see how to set that as a default if you like. Okay, to create our next question, let's click this plus question icon here. This question will be a simple yes or no question. So I'll leave the default multiple choice question type here, which is normally shown. When you choose this question type, you can see at the top here, Google suggests some options for you. So I'll simply click the yes. Now when I do that, the second one will be changed to no. If I select another option, Google will propose maybe, for example. But I don't want to use that. I'll type I don't know, which is more appropriate for this question for my students. Okay, so that's yes, no, and I don't know. And like the previous question, you can also edit the question and answers. You can delete an answer, or you can drag this icon to reorder the answer options. That is a multiple choice question. And again, I'm going to make it required. The next question type I'll write is a short answer question. Again, this icon can be clicked here to add new questions. This question will be, what do you think a wind turbine can do? Now click the question type window here, and let's change the question type from multiple choice to short answer question. For this kind of question, we don't need to give any options, but don't forget to make it required so students can't skip it. Notice that next to the required button there is a 3 dots icon, which is always more. You should know that your options for each question may depend on the type of question you're asking. Let's see what they are for a short answer question. Click that, and you'll see 2 options, description and response validation. Description allows you to give a further description of the questions. So for example, give instructions or further guidance to the students for answering this specific question. Okay, response validation means that you can filter students' responses. In other words, you can determine specific criteria that students need to meet in their answer. So for example, for this question, because it's a short answer, I might want to limit the number of words or letters students can put here. So to do that, I'll change the selection from number to length, and then I'll change the maximum character count to, let's say, 20. There are other limits, such as in text. You can require the submission of a URL link or an email, or you can require numbers fitting certain criteria, or even regular expressions for formatting. But those are options we won't look at right now. For most short answer questions, you won't actually need to use response validation at all. This is just a little premium feature. Okay, next I'd like to show you a fantastic feature of Google Forms, which is not another question type exactly, but how to insert a video as a part of your form. As teachers, we all know how useful multimedia content is for contextualizing language, even for motivating students. So this allows us to make a video a part of any form or question in our Google form. For example, I can ask students to watch a video before the lesson, as in flipped class style. So they'll come with some prior knowledge prepared for the lesson. Adding questions related to the video helps to ensure perhaps that students will watch it and will pay attention. So let's see how to do that. To insert a video, click this video icon here, and you'll be given two options. One is that you can search for the video you're looking for in YouTube. That might be handy if you're just looking for the right video. And the other one, which you'll use more often, is that you will be able to paste the URL or link of the video that you have already selected. Okay, I have my link ready, so I'll just paste it right here. Forms will show us a preview window, and if this is the video you want, you just click Select. There it is. The video is inserted into our form. All right, and if you click on the three dots, More icon, you will be able to adjust the alignment of the video to the left or the center or to the right. You can also choose the option of changing the video or simply remove it altogether. I'll just move my video to the center here, which looks pretty good. And then I'll give some instructions here where you could add the title of the video or just write whatever you like. I'll type some simple instructions. So obviously this video integration feature can be very helpful in teaching language, and it's a real added value feature of Google Forms. Okay, now let's move on and look at another type of question you can include in forms. Once again, very useful for language teaching, and that is the long answer question, also known as paragraph in Google Forms. As always, to add a new question, click the plus icon here. Okay, I'll write my question here. This will encourage my students to think actively about the topic and also to refresh their memory of the vocabulary that they've learned related to this topic. Okay, Google Forms, notice, will often interpret your question and suggest an appropriate question type. It won't always get this right, like in our previous example, but here is an example of when it did get it right. So Google Forms has already suggested the paragraph question type, which is suitable for longer text answers or a list of words, as in this case. So again, I'm going to make this question required, and then I'm also going to validate the minimum character count, because I don't want my students writing just 3 or 4 short words. So for example, I can expect a minimum of 50 letters. So now they should brainstorm more words related to the topic of wind. I want my students to be creative and to challenge themselves. But of course, as I mentioned before, you don't have to use this validation feature at all. And the form will accept any answer they give, even one 4-letter word like kite. Okay, there are other question types you can create in Google Forms, such as grid type question. Not all of these are often used by language teachers. Others may be very useful, such as checkboxes, but we'll look at that in the quizzes section. You can even ask students to submit files, such as photos or videos, through a Google form. And we do give an example of that in another section as well in Web Camera. But right now, to focus on the most often used and practical features of Google Forms, let's take a look at some of these other options for managing questions. For example, notice this 2 pages icon at the bottom of each question. If you click on that, it will instantly duplicate your question, which of course can be very helpful. As you know, many questions may be similar in form or length or type, so this can provide a quick kind of rough draft for you, which you only need to edit slightly. In my case, I don't need a duplicate question, so I can click here on the trash bin icon to delete it. Another very convenient feature is that if you want to reorder your questions, you can drag them and reorder the whole question, just as we did earlier for individual answers or options. So for example, I think this video question should be left to the end of the survey, as it's a kind of assignment. So to do that, click on this tab icon with the 6 dots at the top of the question block, and then drag the whole question up or down to position it where you like. Okay, now let's take a look at the settings options for my form. So go to the top bar of your form here and click your Settings tab. Here you can see it says, make this a quiz. This is a very important feature of forms, and so we'll address it in depth in the next section, which we're calling Google Quizzes. Okay, but right now, continuing with the settings, in this subsection of your settings called Responses, you can enable Collect Email Addresses, and you can toggle that on. That requires students to be signed in with a Google account, and you will have a record of who gave what answer. But for this demonstration form, I already wrote in the description that this pre-reading activity is anonymous, so I will not enable it for this particular form. For many other forms or assignments, which might need checking, of course I would do that. I often do. For example, if I want to include a video in the form and then ask my students some questions about it, I can then collect their names by requiring the email address. Okay, the next option you can select is send responders a copy of their responses. This also requires you to select the previous collect email addresses. But then students will be emailed a copy of their answers. Okay, once again, I won't do that for the demo. The next option is allow response editing. You can choose that option if you want to allow students to change or edit their responses after they submit it. FYI, you can always turn off accepting responses later too. So if you want to allow students to submit as many times as they like up till a cutoff date or deadline, you can do that, and I will show you how to do that a bit later. The next option here is to restrict to users of your organization. That is sometimes useful for primary students, for example, to ensure that only school members are participating in assignments and adds an extra layer of security. But this may not always be a good option if, for example, some students like to use their personal Google accounts. Turning this on would prevent them from doing that and may be quite frustrating or annoying to them. So your call. The next option would limit users to one response. This can be convenient if you don't want a bunch of submissions from one student. But again, this option does require students to sign into a Google account. The next setting allows you to manage how forms and responses are presented. It's not a toggle button here, but a drop-down menu. When you click it, you can see how to control how students see your form. So very quickly, the options are Show Progress Bar. This is useful if you have a long multi-page form. Then students will know from the progress bar if they are, say, halfway or 3/4 of the way or almost done with the form. And so this provides a kind of signpost of their progress. Next is Shuffle Question Order. I think this is more useful in an assessment activity. But if you give a form for homework, you may want to reorder the questions so students' forms are all different, making it a bit harder to cheat. Well, the disadvantage is that sometimes the order of your questions is kind of a logical flow. So personally, I rarely use this feature. confirmation message. This allows you to customize the message students see when they submit the form. This is nice, and you can write what you like. I won't make any changes for now. Next is show link to submit another response. This allows students to do the form more than once if you've allowed it and without signing in. But this may not be needed in most cases with student activities. Your call again. Next is view results summary. This now is a potentially very interesting feature for student activity forms, where students can view the results of those who have taken the survey so far. This can be used for an assignment for learning, or assessment for learning, or a class activity assignment. But again, not very frequently used, but use these resources to think of creative new ways to engage students. An authentic survey about students' opinions might be very interesting to them. So, for example, should students be allowed to use ChatGPT in completing writing assignments? What do they think? Why? They might be keen to know each other's thoughts and ideas in an authentic survey. Okay, let's look at disable autosave for all responders. If you want Google to save answers, even if a browser tab is closed, for example, you can click this. I like to ask students to keep a record of their own answers in most cases, especially with any graded assignment, but it may not be necessary in a simple form like this demo. Okay, finally at the bottom of settings, we have a couple of default options. Default is a word I've been using a lot here. That's the option automatically or previously selected. And here you can set a couple of your own defaults for all of your forms. You can choose collect email addresses. This, of course, will require students to be signed in to submit any form. But even with this as default, you can always turn it off for individual forms later if you like. And then this one, question defaults. So this allows you to toggle on make questions required, which for teachers is probably a good default to have turned on to require all the questions to be answered. Again, if there's individual question exceptions, later on you can always toggle those off. All right, so that's it for the settings options. Next, I'm going to show you how you can customize the appearance of your form. This is a lot of fun for making each form look different or more personalized or varied. Just a little way to make forms more interesting too, like giving them a fresh set of clothing. Okay, let's start. Go to this painting palette icon and click it, and you'll be given the option to first change the font style and font size for your form's headers, questions, and other text. You can also change the image of the header. I always like to choose a different design or color for each form to distinguish them and keep things a little bit interesting. But when you click this Choose Image button, you'll see that Google gives you many categories and options of good pre-made images under Themes here. But you can also click Upload here, and you can upload your own banner. I've prepared some pictures from my lesson, so I'll click these windmills. When I do that, I have to make some adjustments to framing and save my changes by clicking Done to save and upload the image. Now you'll see my banner image at the top of the form. Google also updates the color background to match. But of course you can always choose your own theme color if you like by clicking one of these options here. The plus icon will give you more options, and here you can change the background color as well. Okay, that's it for appearance settings. Now let us have a final review or preview of our form. All the questions and how it will look to our students before we send it off to them. To do that, click this preview icon. You'll see the form exactly how it will appear to your students, except you have this little pencil icon, Edit button here. If you want to make any changes, just click the Edit button and you can update your form. I think I'm happy with this demo pre-reading worksheet form. So let's talk about how to send the form to your students. So to do that, you won't be surprised that we use this very conspicuous purple send button here. Once you click that button, you can see that Google Forms provides you with 3 options of how to share the form. The first option is at this letter icon button here. This is if I want to email my form to students. For example, I have an email list that I want to use. The second option is this URL link icon here. When I click that, I can see the link appear, which I can copy here, or I can even shorten the URL here and copy, paste, or share wherever I like. Okay, the third option is the embed link here. This is slightly advanced, but a very nice feature to use if you're using a website or something like Google Sites or Blogger, another part of this course. You may be using it as a personal LMS, or you may have a school-wide LMS in which you would like to embed content. Then this allows you to present the form directly on that platform without students having to follow a link. You would just copy the HTML code in your target site after adjusting it to the size that you want. Okay, so that's how we create a form, including adding several question types, adjusting the appearance, and selecting an option for how to share it with students. I've already shared this demo form with a small group of students using the link option, so now let's check out their responses. This Responses tab allows you to see how many students have responded. This number is a very useful feature. I will often use forms not only for homework activities or assignments, but also in-class activities for blended learning. That is whether I'm teaching in the classroom, the physical classroom, or online. It works both ways. You know how many students you have, and so you can prompt them or encourage their participation and keep track of the number of submissions you've received at any time. I can see that 3 students have completed my form already. So to see your students' responses, click the Responses tab here, and you will see this layout. At the top, as I mentioned earlier, you can toggle the button Not Accepting Responses on and off. So here it is. If the deadline has passed and you don't want to allow students to submit to the form anymore, you can turn this on, and you'll see this message for respondents, which you can also customize by clicking on it and editing it. Okay, under that you will see 3 tabs: Summary, Question, and Individual, allowing you to select different and very useful options for how you see your students' responses. Summary is shown automatically, and here you can see, of course, a summary of all your students' responses. But they are presented automatically by Google according to the type of question you asked and how you can best view or see all of the data all at once. This second tab, Question, is useful if you want to see all the responses for each question, one at a time. So, for example, there may have been a kind of tough question. Let me choose like this one. Have you ever seen a wind turbine before? And there you will see all the answers at once. You can also make use of this arrow icon to navigate through the different questions easily. Okay, finally, the Individual tab allows you to review student answers one at a time, student by student. If you collected students' names, unlike I did this time, but usually do, you can navigate through each one and see how they did. Again, you have an arrow icon here, so you can navigate back and forth easily. So, depending on your needs, you view the responses by summary, question, or individual views. I love having these options, not only for checking overall performance and individual checking, but also for presenting answers or information to students. In the summary view, for example, you can even copy the presentation graph or data to paste in a Google slide, Pear Deck, or PowerPoint. You'll see the icon there for copying. Also helpful here, you can print students' responses or delete student responses if you want them to redo the whole survey. Here, we also see the familiar ellipses, 3 dots icon. If you click on it, you can see more options, allowing you, for example, to get email notifications of answers, select responses destination, which includes saving them to a Google Sheets file, or if you have already done that for any form, you can select an existing sheet file just to update it with fresh data. You also have unlink a form if you want to disable your form link that you've circulated. You can download responses as a CSV or Excel file. Again, print all responses, and finally delete all responses. So that is our quick overview of many, if not most, of the useful features of Google Forms for teachers. If you're new to using this app, I know you'll find it very useful for many, many activities. And if you've used it before, I hope you've learned a new tip or trick or two. Because Google Forms also has many powerful assessment features in its quizzes options, we're treating how to create and use Google Quizzes as a separate section of our course called Google Quizzes. So look for that. So e-teachers, keep exploring all these great e-resources, and we'll see you in the next section of our course.